Well, hey, welcome to Crossroads and Catalyst, the podcast with Shanita B. I am your host, and this is where we discuss the right perspective at a crossroads can be the catalyst for change. Thank you for joining me, and I'm really glad that you are because today's episode is going to be one where we dive a little bit deeper into our origins of work, how those views are shaped. And I think that that's important because when we find ourselves at a crossroads, we're not simply dealing with the scenario or the circumstance that's right in front of us. We're dealing with everything that has led us to that particular point. And a lot of that has to do with what we were taught in our formative years and then how we began our work career and ended up in whatever place where we're finding ourselves. So just thinking back, when it comes to the origins of our work, I can just remember the model that was set for me by my parents. Both of my parents worked, and some of my fondest memories was when my father, who worked at the time night shift, would we would have dinner, and once dinner was finished, he would gather his belongings and he would give my sister, me, and my mom a kiss, and he would go off to work. He worked the graveyard shift, and so overnight, that's what he did. And he did that for a number of years. And subsequently, well, I say subsequently, during that same time, he decided that he wanted to do something more. He was a machinist working in the manufacturing plant, and he decided that he wanted to do something more. So he enrolled into college, and it took him some time, but he graduated. He did all of the hard work, working full time, was a father, a husband, a provider, and he graduated. He was the first in our family to go to school to graduate from college. And so that I think was part of the legacy and the foundation that was laid for me. And I got to see my father do that, which I think is so impressive. It's still impressive today. And so when I think about the impact that that had on me, my father started out as a machinist for a company, and eventually he retired as the vice president of IT. Now, that was a big deal because of the background, because of my father's background. You're talking about the father, a teenage father, taking care of a family. Same for my mother, a teenage mother taking care of a family, not really sure how to navigate because, of course, we don't come into this world with instructions on how to do A, B, and C. But a lot of times when we get our start, it's sometimes very faulty and we're hitting a lot of bumps uh, along the way. But they handled it. And my father is one of the most successful people who I know simply because of what he did and how he committed himself. Because he didn't start off with the silver spoon in his mouth. He had to work for everything that he got. And so that was definitely part of what shaped my view of work and how I would pursue working, how I would pursue even my education. My mother, she when this is when my parents were married. My parents are divorced, but when they were married, again, as I was a child, when my father was going off to work overnight, she would get us to bed. The next day, she would go to work. She retired as a secretary for the state of Oklahoma. Hardworking woman. I don't recall really hearing my parents speak negatively about work. I remember them telling us that you will have to work hard in order to achieve success. And what does success look like? Well, of course, that was a variety of things. But I can distinctly recall that my mom would take my sister and I to the Parade of Homes every year. At that time, it was just one time a year, I believe. And we would go to these different open houses, these newly constructed houses, and see some of the latest and greatest designs. And for some of you who don't know what Parade of Homes is, it's just an annual open house where construction and architect construction. It's an annual event where new houses are showcased so that people can go and check out the latest and the greatest in home design. And we would just go and visit these beautiful homes and see how wonderful they were, all of the gorgeous designs. And she would tell us, if you want this, then you need to get an education and you need to work. You need to work hard. You need to commit to it. And you can have these types of things. And my mother believed that. And my father believed it too. And I think that because of the foundation that they set for us, and they also modeled it for us, and they also talked to us about it, it really instilled in me and my sister that if you want to achieve something, you can do it, and there's nothing holding you back. I didn't grow up believing that there was nothing that I could not do. As far as I knew, if I could think of it, if I could dream it, I could achieve it. And that's exactly what I did. And, this harkens back even to the first job that I had because my parents did encourage me and my sister to work when we were teenagers. I got my first job when I was 16, and it was in the summer, and it was at the same company where my father worked. And this company, they had an annual program whereby they would allow their employees, teenagers, come and work for the summer, and that was what I did. And one of the reasons why that was so impressive to me is because I worked in the assembly shop, and the assembly shop was hot. There was no AC. There were just big fans that just kind of helped to keep the air moving, and sometimes that was not enough. So it could be pretty miserable, but to put this in context, the summer job that I had was not nearly as miserable as some of the summer jobs some of the other kids had, because there were some who were working on the roof of buildings outside in the hot sun. So I was definitely thankful that I had the cush position of working inside in the hot building with these hot blowing fans, these big industrial fans. But I tell you that because part of that story is uh, are the employees who I worked with. And I worked with some elderly ladies. We were on the assembly line, and so we were putting together oil and gas. I think there were gauges or some type of thermostat that we were putting together. And so again, I was this 16-year-old kid, didn't know anything. This is the first job that I had. And I was working with these elderly ladies who were, probably just over 60 or maybe in their mid 60s and very near retirement. And they had been doing that job, that level of work for decades at that point. And what I can distinctly remember about those experiences is that those ladies, well, number one, they were glad to see young people, and number two, they were very willing and open to share their opinion. And I think we all have those grandmotherly types in our lives who do not hold back, and they are definitely very willing to share with you what they think. But in this instance, they were they wanted to see me succeed. They wanted to see me do well. And so what they told me is, honey, you don't want to be like us. You don't want to work at a job like this for 30, 40 years. You need to go to college, you need to graduate, and you need to get yourself a good job because we don't want to see you like us doing this. And again, very impressive. And it even if they hadn't said that, I'm sure that I had heard enough from both of my parents to recognize that. But the fact that these elderly ladies would take the time to engage and talk to me and encourage me to do more than even what they were doing, that meant a lot to me because I knew that I didn't want to work in a hot shop for the rest of my life. I wanted to be able to chart my own course. And so I took that advice and I ran with it in addition to the sound advice that my parents had already given to me, and even some of the other examples that I had seen from my friends, and well, my friends and my friends' parents, because again, working class families, we were all in the same neighborhood, of course, and we were just trying to make it. Everybody was just trying to make it. But I think that I saw the example that you can do more than just make it. You can do above and beyond, and you can live a good life, but you have to be the one that makes the decision and commits to it. And that's what we did. And so I also let's take a minute to even think about this from the faith perspective and how that may impact our view of work. Just like what my parents taught me about work helped me to understand what I need to think about work, I also think that the Bible gives me some clarity about that as well. Because even when you look at the book of Genesis in the very beginning, it tells us that God looked at his work and he said that it was good. Think about that just for a minute. God looked at his work and he said that it is good. Now, we definitely understand that the type of work that God does and the type of work that we do are those are completely different, and they can't be directly compared to one another. But I think that there's a lot to be said about the fact that God was pleased with the work that he did once he looked at it and it was completed. I think that there's a level of satisfaction that we can expect to obtain from our work, even if it is hard. Years ago when they used to have shop class in high schools and in junior high, you would be taught how to construct something from, just a wood block, and you would have the opportunity to work through that process, following the instruction of the teacher, and then voila, you would have this finished product, something that you yourself did with the input and the tutelage of someone who understood how that thing worked and how to get it done. And that still reigns true with anything that you do, whether you have a hobby, whether you're crafting, sewing, golfing, playing basketball, whatever the case may be. You can step back and look at that and see that this is something that I accomplished. And so just consider those things as you're looking at how your view of work has been shaped and how that might be impacting you today, because that can definitely determine whether your attitude is in the right place or if it needs to be reevaluated. And so that I think that leads into another aspect of how how our origin story of work, how that impacts us with how we view what we're doing in our lives. Consider the fact that if you were in an environment where everything that you heard about work was negative, you carry a lot of that with you. It'd be no different than any other situation that you might have encountered as a child. Things that we learn in those formative years, they have a way of sticking to us, and we don't often even realize it. So, if the only reason why you work is to pay bills, then you may not be as committed to the job as maybe you need to be, especially if you're in a scenario where you want to progress and be promoted. If the only reason why you're there is to get a paycheck, well, a lot of people can spot that very quickly. And it's no different than if you go to some showroom floor where there are salesmen. A lot of you can easily identify the person who is there just to get that check. They just want the commission. They're not really interested in you. They're not interested really in what you want. They want to do just enough to satisfy you so that you will say yes and sign the contract, and so they can take that check from you. Take that credit card from you. So you know, what we believe, it has a way of working itself into our actions. And so if what you've seen your whole life is negativity about work, you may definitely have taken on some of those characteristics and they're playing out in your work life. And so you really want to be serious and conscientious about how you're pursuing work, because again, if you're at a crossroads, you will continue to meet that same crossroads over and over and over. And this also reminds me, even when you think you think about all the things that fall into that category. Just think about even the Israelites, the ancient Israelites. They wandered around in the desert for 40 years. Don't be an ancient Israelite. Learn the lesson and apply the lesson so that you can move forward. You don't want to be stuck uh, going in and out of that same scenario, not having understood why you're there, but finding yourself constantly in that same place. Learn from the mistake so that you can move forward, and then adjust your behavior, adjust even how you talk about work. Because how you talk about work, if you are constantly talking about work, negatively about work, or you're around people who are constantly talking about work in a negative way, it has a way of rubbing off on you. You really don't want to be in a situation like that again, especially when if you're trying to better yourself. I think it goes without saying that in order to better yourself, you have to be around like-minded people. And that might mean making some changes with the people with whom you associate yourself. That's how serious that is. So, work is not simply necessity. Work is also fulfillment, because all of us have something to offer. You just want to you want to find an outlet that will allow you to do that and live up to your potential. But you also want to work on the mindset that is driving and motivating you to do any particular thing. And this gets me to the point of career milestones. What do you do uh, when you experience a setback? How does that change how you think about work? How does that change how you think about the people with whom you work? Again, we're constantly carrying a load of factors, all of these scenarios that we encounter on a regular basis. We have to fight and battle through that so that we don't pick up a negative mindset and continue to carry that with us in all of our relationships, whether they be personal or professional, because they do have a way of creeping out and impacting things for the worse, which is definitely what we don't want. Then you couple that with, let's say, scenarios where there are layoffs, and sometimes there are widespread layoffs. It might not just be local to that particular company where you work. It could be local or regional, within the city, within the state, across the nation. If you talk about something in the greater economy where there might be a recession and a lot of people are impacted, that definitely can change how you view work and how you even pursue it, because it makes it more difficult to find work. It makes it more difficult to move out of the place where you might be, where the circumstances are not really nurturing and welcoming to you and the work that you're doing or the work that you would like to do. Or maybe you have a situation where you're dealing with a toxic manager, toxic leader, or you're working with people who are somewhat hostile. There are a whole host of circumstances that surround each of us, and we have to learn how to navigate those. But we want to be sure that we're not picking up a negative view on work, because it is something that we have to do. Again, since we're not ultra rich, we recognize that we have to work for a living, because we are the ones who are able to provide for ourselves. You need the basics of life, the food, the shelter, the clothing. The only way that you're going to get it is to work. And so it's better to approach work with a grateful mindset, even if you're not getting everything out of it that you had hoped for. The circumstances, the environment, they will change at some point. But how you handle going about doing that work today might impact that opportunity if it comes along down the road, however long that may take. And then let's also talk about, the change in work. COVID, it's hard to believe that that was just 5 years ago, but COVID really changed the face of work. I think in some instances it unmasked some things that everybody probably knew was beneath the surface. And by that, what I mean is, you consider that a lot of the work that was taking place in offices that were moved to home bases. So people were now working remotely and they were working from home, and it was just as easy for them to accomplish their tasks as it was for them to do it in the office. And so then I think organizations realized that there was an opportunity to save some money. In some instances, there was the increase in productivity. So you found that some people were able to get more done because they just didn't have the regular interruptions that you would find in an office space. But at the same time, it just completely shifted how everybody looks at work. Some people work remotely. My team did not work remotely, but part of that was because I was in healthcare, and because the departments that we served remained open. It was important for us to remain open. But that might not have been the situation for a lot of people, because I knew other departments where I worked where the people were sent home and they did their work from home. Now, the results didn't always come back as, uh, I would say, consistent. Maybe they weren't as consistent as they were when they were in the office, but the work was still getting done. But when you look at the greater scheme, that's just, my experience here locally. You look across the United States and even across the world, people are still struggling with the notion, well, do we continue the remote work or do we bring them back in? You have some large organizations that have determined, yes, we're going to bring people back in. And this even puts me in mind of the article or the story about, I think it's Jamie Dimon, the president of, what is the name of the bank? Chase Bank. He basically wants all people who were working remotely, just about everyone who was working remotely, to return to work. And they were so committed to it that over the last several years, they spent millions of dollars renovating office space in New York to provide amenities and accommodations for the workers who are supposed to return back to the office from working remotely. They wanted to make that space very appealing, partly to kind of curb some of the irritation, frustration, and maybe even anger from those employees who had become accustomed to working from home. This is how different how it is today. In some scenarios, you have companies that are offering remote work as a benefit. In other scenarios, you have companies saying, no, we want you to work in the office 100%. And in other scenarios, you have companies that are saying we're doing hybrid models. So we're still not completely settled on what that work is supposed to look like, but that has completely changed how we look at work. And the other aspect that has changed recently too is how we do our work. Are we actually going to be the ones doing the work, or are we going to be relying more upon AI to help us with our work? Well, we're going to get into that in some later episodes because this is definitely changing uh, the overall landscape of work, because there are going to be some positions that may be eliminated completely because AI will be able to do that for us. And so that too lends credibility to the notion that we have to rethink how we view work and how we approach it, because it's going to require some accommodation from us, something that we have to modify and change so that we can continue to be relevant in the workspace. And so we want to approach it with an attitude that, there is something that I can offer to get whatever it is that needs to be done to get it done. Whether you are working for someone or working for yourself, you're going to have to approach your work with an attitude that you bring something valuable that will assist with moving whatever objective is forward. You know, and that's a tough thing. That really is a tough thing, because a lot of people are continuing to struggle with how they're going to fit into the greater landscape of the changing work environment. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that how we view work is so important. And, you know, think about this. Our identities are so important, and we spend our entire lives trying to figure out who we are. And because we spend so much time doing work, again, whether it's for yourself or for other people, other companies, our identities sometimes become intertwined with the work that we do. And so sometimes we might find that we are defining ourselves by our work. Work is what we do, it's not who we are. And you have to understand that, because you need to be able to separate the two. And you need to be able to walk away from the work when it's time to walk away from the work. Understand who you are. Understand your talents and your skill set and your competencies. But understand that the work to which you apply those competencies and those skills, that's what that is. It's work. It's something that you can accomplish, and it's something that you can set aside. You can't set aside your identity when you clock out. Your identity continues with you. That is made up of your personality and the characteristics, your faith, and a host of other factors that impact the identity that you take on. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that the two are not the same. And so, you know, like I just said, understand that the work is separate from who we are, and that work is necessary. It's necessary for us to live, but it also gives us purpose. And it's helpful for us to understand that so that we can apply our skills and talents for good. because that's truly a very important thing for us. And, you know, what we've learned in our formative years, whether good or bad, they do impact how we move through work and how we approach work. So as you're considering these things, you know, ask yourself, is there another way for me to look at this situation that I haven't considered before? Have conversations with some of your peers and colleagues and you know, some of your friends. Talk about this because I think that it's important. You don't want to find yourself rolling out of bed every day and dragging to work because you don't want to be there. And sometimes you might have to do that for a short period of time, but a lot of that has to do with a choice that you've made. And I know that there are some of us who are working with people who are not easy. They're not easy to work with, but you can't change them. You can only change yourself. And so consider how you view work, how you think about work, and what you want that to look like. And if you find that you have repeated the circle and have come to the same crossroad over and over, then look in the mirror and ask yourself, what am I doing that I might need to change so that I don't approach the same crossroad again? It sounds simple. I know that it's not because self-reflection is not always simple, but it's important that we take the time to self-reflect because it'll make us better people if we evaluate it honestly and as objectively as we can. So that's pretty much a wrap on today's episode. And I really am thankful that you joined me and gave me some of your time, effort, and attention. And so I want you to remember that every action is predicated by a choice that we make. And every challenge that we encounter is fuel for the journey. We have to be the ones to decide where we're going to go. So um, until next time, consider what we discussed today and be sure to look forward to the next episode and share and like and subscribe. We'll talk soon.